Hey guys, so let's begin, shall we? In this series, you will be able to follow the progress of my game, from start to end. Because I decided to make it on New Year's, it will be easy to track the progress that I make on 2019 and how much of the game gets done in a year. My ideal goal is to finish it by 2020, so you guys can play it already. But since it's my first game, I wouldn't bet money on that yet. I decided to record and explain the progress because I think it will be useful for you guys to see exactly how an indie game evolves during its development. So, the first week I started working on the game, it was actually crazy because I did a lot. Before this week, I installed Unity and I was mostly checking tutorials on how to use it. Mostly I was gathering ideas on what to do in Unity. I also defined a lot of the game. I sketched and wrote down game mechanics, gameplay, aesthetics. I also defined a roadmap for the game's development progress, as well as how I would name the progress. Here is what I ended up planning. I will be adding these notes sometimes so you guys can see how I develop an idea. It saves you a lot of time if you know what you're gonna do before you sit down on the computer. For this, I usually do it on paper, because just putting your ideas down from your head allows you to see them clearly and to work on them easier. I realized when I get stuck, sketching them down helps you visualize your ideas. If they don't get clear the first time, then repeat it over and over. I know it doesn't make much sense, but doing that has worked great so far. Every time you rethink an idea while explaining it to yourself, you think something that you didn't think before. So I will show you guys some examples of an idea that went from a thought to a feature in the game. I hopefully will help you get inspired if you guys get stuck in your own game. Just a disclaimer, because these notes are for me, they won't be very clean, so please excuse the mess. I will try my best to make them understandable for you. As I was saying, the naming is based on the playable levels of my game. Every time I add a feature or an important asset, for example, I add one new version here. I hope you guys are finally ready to see my game. So, this is the game. I was working on the textures and everything on the last update, and as you can see, I think I did something good. The game is playing pretty smooth, and it's better than I hoped it would be. Yeah, just kidding. The game doesn't look like that for now. This is how it used to look the first time I worked on it. To start, I made simple models of the objects for the scene with Unity itself. As you can see, they are very simple objects with cubes, spheres, and cylinders. I learned also about movement types for my player. The blue ball is the player that we will control, and the grey one will be an NPC in the world that has an AI bound to it. We move the blue player by clicking on the world where we want to go, and the player then goes there. The grey one is waiting until the blue player gets close enough so it triggers the chasing behavior. The grey ball has as a target the center position of the blue one. And you can actually see how it pushes a bit the player because it cannot go through the object. The objects are in the world because they have rigid body components that make them collide with the ground. The player also has those components, so is able to push the rocks around. As you can see there, it will fall because there is gravity as well. Some issues I have in this version is when I click outside the world, it resets the position to the center. And another issue that you can see is that I don't have any UI elements. So if I actually want to close the game, I need to do a trick. And close it down manually. As you can see, here I start working on the UI elements. I was learning about interactable buttons and the HUD. The HUD elements are the ones that don't exist in the real world but are constantly attached to the screen. I added a button and text. Actually, this button is not a single one, it's one that disappears and the other one with the text on appears, making the illusion of a toggle button when in reality it's two different ones doing two different things. I also added these two buttons that allow you to choose between controlling the player manually or giving him automatic movement. The manual mode is the one like we used to have before. When you click, the player will go wherever you click. Another major change you can notice right away is that I added some geometries to the player and I made a body out of multiple objects instead of having a single sphere. I also added some eyes so you can tell where is the front and the back, and also so you know what way the player is facing when moving. The yellow cube had a trigger area to detect if the player is near. When the player gets near, it triggers that the cube jumps, and it will only detect the player. It won't be triggered by other objects like this NPC. I made this cube because I was learning about triggering events, and this cube will in the future become an energy cube that you will be able to collect. We still have the same issue when we click out of the world, the player resets its position to 000, and another issue you can see is that there's still no way of exiting the game, so if you want to exit you need to force it out and then enter the game again. You do this because there is no way of resetting the automatic of the manual mode. This time when I click auto, the player starts wandering around. I made this AI behavior because I want the guy, when you are not interacting with it, to feel alive and not just sitting there doing nothing. The difference between this wandering mode and the direct one that you tell him where to go is that in this case he's getting a random coordinate X, Y, and Z, and it goes to that position every few seconds, making the illusion of wandering around. In the future I would like to combine all these behaviors, chasing, moving, and wandering, into different states the player will have. As you can see on my third update, I added a lot of new elements. In this one I had the jumping cube that I changed the color to pink, and a new rotating cube that I colored yellow. The pink cube is the same as before. When you get close it triggers the jumping behavior, and the yellow cubes will be now the ones that you collect. I call them energy cubes. The pink cube has an area of effect that you don't actually see because it's rendered, it's being hidden even if the area itself is active. And the yellow cube also have a trigger area that in this case it's the same area as their own body, and it triggers a behavior that makes them disappear when the player gets into that area. As you can see here, the cubes also have a counter, so you can keep track of how many cubes you've gathered here. It's been displayed on the screen in a very simple way. Here I was learning about text and how to display it on the HUD. The fire prefab is there just to understand how particles work and particle emitters, so I was researching them at this point. That's why there is nothing really related to the game. Actually, because I was learning how they work, I managed to make this change as well. I still named it 003 because I didn't think it was an actual improvement to the game, but I was researching how particles work. This particle emitter is the same as the fire one, but I just made it bigger. I put it on the sky and I changed it how the particles physics, time, and color are different from the fire one. If you pay close attention, another change that I put that is not very obvious is that the guy actually has an animation going on him. He's like breathing. As you can see, it's very subtle. I was learning how to implement this animation. Again, we have the same as before. If you want to go into manual mode or automatic mode, the player will start moving around. In this update, I started adding animations to the player. I made 3 animations: idling, walking, and running. These animations will change depending on what behavior the player has, and it won't be by default all the time. These animations are very simple because I made them with Unity itself with the animator tool. Another big addition was the implementation of the attention system. Here I added some text elements on the HUD to keep track of how the player will behave. Every time we call the player, a random number generates from 1 to 10. Then this number gets added to the obedience stats of the player. If this number, what is the attention of the player, is 10 or more, the player will obey the order and move. By default, the player starts with 0 obedience, so there is 10% chance that the player will obey. The way that we increase the obedience is by calling him with the Hey button. Every time we click the button, a number gets added to the counter, what increases our chances that the player will obey us. For example, at level 5, there is 50% chance that the player will obey us. When we reach the max level, obedience 10, the player will obey 100% of the orders. All these systems' point is to add a progression system for the player. With this, you will be able to train and make the player obey you, starting by not obeying at all to be fully trained. The last simple fix I did for this version was making that the gray guy stops when it gets close, so it won't push the blue player around. As you may have noticed, if you were paying close attention, you could see that I finally added a start menu to the game. Even if it's not 100% necessary at this stage of the development, because I'm constantly opening and closing the game to test the changes, it will save me time because I don't need to be hacking my way out of the game all the time. And the menu is not just for the looks, it actually works. Another menu that was added was to test how the menu will be later on, and it's just a placeholder for now. The buttons don't really do anything. This later will evolve into the craft system, but for now it's just a placeholder. A new thing that I was learning at this point was spawning and destroying objects. For this I created a prefab for the previous rock model I made. The rock has a trigger area for when the player gets close. When the player enters this area, it makes the model disappear and it activates small stomp cubes. The exploding effect happened by accident because the cubes are rigid bodies, and when they spawn, if 2 of them are sharing the same space, they will push each other. Even if originally this was a bug, to this date is the best and simplest way I found to make an explosion animation with physical objects. The stomps for now are just for looks, but later on you will be able to pick them up and they will be like loot or material to craft other items. A change on the player behavior is that now, when you get the player's attention, it looks to the camera and it resets to look forward after. As you can see here, the player transitions between animations depending if he's running, walking, or idling. In this update I really didn't add anything, so yeah, I'm just kidding. As you can see, I added and changed a lot of things in this update. I added the first interactable menus for the game, and was the first time that I added custom icons that I made with Photoshop. All these menus are just placeholders of how things will look later, and they don't really do anything yet, but I added them to have an idea of how things will look later on. I added the obedience stat manager of behavior in this panel that only displays when you open it. And this time there is no hey button on the corner. If you want to add obedience, you have to interact with the player, and every time you successfully get its attention, it will add 1 to the counter. I made this change in order to make it more realistic, the feeling of bonding with the player. I also added these early visualizations of how the stats will work in the game and how they will be displayed, even if they are just an image. It's important to know that all these systems and managers are first made just to work and to have in the game, for when we develop the actual gameplay. Then later we will change all the values and the amounts, and we will balance the game in order to be fun. But for now, they're added just to be functional. A last change I made for this version was adding the snow system, that it triggers the snow particles and activates them, and also changes the material of the ground when the button is clicked. If we want to exit the game, again we press escape and this triggers the menu. Actually the menu resets the entire scene, so the game starts over the stats. So it's a good way of restarting the gameplay to test it. If we want to exit, we click quit and the game closes. So that's it guys, that's all I worked on the first week. I hope you guys liked it. Sorry for the video being so long. It's because it's early on development. I hope later on the videos will be a bit shorter. If you guys are interested in the rest of the development, subscribe so you will be able to follow the progress. If you guys have any comments, please leave it down there. I will be happy to read your thoughts. So that's it for this week. Bye!